Good morning, Year 9, and welcome to your second live lesson of your new topic. Again, we are looking at Gothic horror, but today you're going to be looking at the device pathetic fallacy and how that is used in creating that Gothic atmosphere that we were looking at last lesson. For your DNA, the very first thing that I would like you to do is look at the following images that show a type of weather. And I want you to think about what mood is being created through these images. Okay? You might want to list a couple of adjectives next to each one, completely up to you. But what mood is being created? Then what I would like you to do is for each type of weather, think of a brief story idea that would suit that setting or that weather type, okay? So for instance, what kind of story would you find or what plot might happen in the image with the lightning? What sort of story might happen with the rainbow? And so on. Give yourself 5 minutes to complete this task. So pause the video and when you are ready to continue, press play. Like I mentioned earlier, your focus for today is pathetic fallacy, and you're going to be exploring how that device is used within a text and analyse its effect on the audience and the reader. So we are looking at language analysis. This is AO2, and your skills that we are looking at is being able to first of all identify where pathetic fallacy is used, and that is your good progress for today. And then your outstanding will be to analyse the effect of pathetic fallacy and other devices that are used in a Gothic text. So key vocab that we're going to need for today is pathetic fallacy because it is our device, but some other vocab that you might need is gusts. If you're not sure what gusts are, it's a very strong wind, and also that ominous, okay? So this idea that something's quite dark and sinister. Before we try and identify pathetic fallacy within a text, I would like you to listen to the following clips and think about what mood or atmosphere is created through the music. So there are 3 clips for you to listen to. If you can't, click on the link on the slide, just type each of the video's title into YouTube. So we've got Despicable Me 2 Happy, Linkin Park Paper Cuts, like a music video, and then Dark Piano Sociopath, okay? Just from the titles, I'm pretty sure you can guess what sort of music or mood might be created. For each one, you can either make your notes in a bullet point format or as in a mind map, as I would probably prefer to do, but it's completely up to you. For each clip, I would like you to think about what mood is created and try and think of at least 3 adjectives to describe the atmosphere. And if you can think of more, amazing, okay? You might want to try and use a thesaurus to find more interesting synonyms for the adjectives, so more interesting ways of saying what mood is being created, okay? I'd then also like to think about what events might be happening for each of those like clips for each of those types of music. And then I would also like you to think about what emotions do we connect to that type of music as well, okay? As a challenge for each one, I would like you to try and think of a film or a book where each of those sound clips would work as their soundtrack. So think of a film where, for instance, the song Happy might fit into. Think of a film where Paper Cut might fit into. Okay? And try and give me a little explanation why it would work. Don't spend too long on this task. Maybe give yourself about 5 minutes. You don't need to watch all of the clips. Just get a feel for the music that's being shown. Coming to the big question of the lesson then, what is pathetic fallacy? So pathetic fallacy is a device that is used quite a lot or mentioned quite a lot within an English classroom, and I've said it at least 20 times in the past 2 lessons alone when we've been focusing on Gothic horror. So we know it is also something that's super important within this genre. And thinking back to the music videos that you've just watched, it is something that is definitely connected and definitely used when creating an atmosphere. So super quickly, pathetic fallacy is when we use the weather specifically to reflect the mood or atmosphere, okay? So for instance, if I'm super happy or if I'm feeling a really positive emotion, I might have it be absolutely beaming outside. You know, the sun's coming in, I'm lying down, I'm getting a tan, okay? Perhaps if I'm feeling quite sad or there is something quite miserable going on, it might be raining. If there's a secret that I want to hide, then there might be a bit of fog outside. Okay, the weather reflects what's going on within the current scene. Okay, within within the story. And as I've previously said, this is a common technique in Gothic horror texts, and it is definitely super important. So, for instance, Woman in Black, there's lots of mystery and secrecy going on there, and no one really knows what's happened at Hill House. And that's why it's always foggy all the time. It's always quite miserable and dark. So, there is a short extract from a Gothic horror novel in front of you. And I want you to try and identify examples of pathetic fallacy. So you might want to make a note of these and list them as you go along, okay? So have a quick read through. You might want to pause the video while you do this. Remember, you are looking for examples of weather and what the weather is doing. Hopefully you guys have found the examples that are currently on the slide. Hopefully you've found more, maybe. That'd be great if you have. Starting off then, these are examples of pathetic fallacy, and just a reminder that pathetic fallacy is super important in Gothic horror. I'm going to go through it bit by bit. The first one, a vast, heavy veil. So this suggests that obviously the weather is quite miserable. It's also almost never ending, it's vast, it's large. And the idea that it's heavy as well gives us a sense it's putting a lot of pressure on the people that it's above. And if you remember from last lesson, we spoke about the environment being quite claustrophobic in a Gothic horror novel. So the fact that it's quite heavy is quite stereotypical of a Gothic horror. So again, we're seeing those conventions come through. The idea of it being a veil gives us a sense that there's obviously quite a bit of secrecy, a bit of mystery, some suspense. So again, we're definitely seeing that this extract belongs to a Gothic horror novel, just from that bit alone. It then says, as if in the east there were an eternity of cloud and wind. So we're getting an idea here through the pathetic fallacy that there is just constant misery. It's never ending. Okay, there is almost no light in this area because it is an eternity of cloud and wind. Okay. The writer then goes on to describe the gusts as being furious. So gusts are very strong winds already, but they're now so strong they are furious, they're angered. And again, it's that sense that perhaps there's obviously a lot of mystery. There's a lot of death going on. You might even get the sense that this is almost unnatural, which is another Gothic convention. It was so furious that the wind has managed to strip lead off the roofs of these tall buildings. It's torn up trees and it's carried the sails of windmills away. So we are not getting a nice atmosphere here. It's very negative. It's very aggressive, very sinister. And through this pathetic fallacy, the writer is trying to give the sense that whoever is in this area is not safe, and he's actively trying to make the reader feel uncomfortable and anxious for whatever is going on here. He then describes the rain as being violent blasts, and these are accompanied by rages of wind. So whatever is going on through this pathetic fallacy, we can see that again, it's very sinister. It's not a very positive atmosphere at all. The rain is violent, so we're getting a sense that perhaps there is some death about to happen. Rages of wind, again, sinister, dark. And this is just from a very small extract from this novel that we are getting a lot of conventions of the Gothic horror from. Moving on to the demonstrator this lesson, you're going to be showing us how well you understand pathetic fallacy. You're going to show us that you can identify pathetic fallacy in a text and also be able to explain clearly the effect that pathetic fallacy has had. So we're going to be using SQI, which is statement, quote, inference, or P, if that's the acronym that you prefer, point, evidence, explain. And your question is, how is the use of pathetic fallacy effective in this extract? You might want to write that question down before you start your paragraph. So if you flick back through your notes, you know exactly what question you are answering with that paragraph. As a challenge, you are going to try and zoom in on a keyword from your quotation as well. As a hard challenge, I want you to try and give more than one interpretation. So this suggests, because, it could further imply, because. Okay, we are using the extract that we've just looked at. So if you haven't already identified at least 3 examples of pathetic fallacy in that extract, I suggest you go back and pick out 3 that you think you could explain a lot of before moving on. So we're going to break down your paragraph step by step. So the very first thing we're going to do is make a statement, okay? So our focus for today is pathetic fallacy. So our statement will be the writer uses pathetic fallacy to do whatever. In this instance, the writer is using pathetic fallacy when describing the setting, so when he's building up that environment and setting the scene for his text, okay? Your statement doesn't need to be very long. It should only be about 1 sentence and should be quite simple, okay? Remember, you're going to delve deeper into your analysis when you are doing your explanation, okay? So if you are stuck, you can use that one. If you want to make your own, go for it. Once you've made your statement, the next thing you need to look at is your quotation. So your quotation should back up your statement. So where, for instance, can we see pathetic fallacy being used to describe the setting? Okay. So for instance, your quotation must be copied from the text. You can't just make a quotation up because otherwise you're not really supporting your own point. And you need to make sure you're using quotation marks. So we know that that part of your answer has been taken from the text, okay? So for instance, so furious had been the gusts that high buildings in town had had the lead stripped off their roofs. You can shorten that quote down into so furious had been the gusts. You could shorten it down to the lead stripped off their roofs. It's up to you, okay? But that's what I'm going to be using for this paragraph. So we've made a statement, we've picked a quotation that supports it, we now need to make an inference. And inference is the most important part, and it's the part that where you get all of your marks pretty much, okay? Because it's your explanation. So your inference is where you explain what is being suggested by the quotation and how that supports your point. Okay, so with this, you're really going to pick apart whatever part of the text that you have chosen. If you're doing the quotation that we've chosen, then that's the example that I'm going to give you in a second. What is super important is that you're not just going to repeat what the quote is saying. So for instance, so furious had the gusts. You're not just going to change the wording of that and say that the wind is furious or that, you know, the wind is angry. You need to try and delve a little bit deeper when you're analysing your quotation. So I'm just going to read through my example. This technique is effective as it suggests that the wind is ferocious and dangerous. Stating that high buildings in town had had the lead stripped off their roofs depicts the idea that the wind is powerful, violent, and dominant over everything else. So I am taking that quote and I am saying that because the wind is ripping apart things from roofs, that it's powerful, it's dominant, okay? And I'm saying that it's super violent. I've not just turned around and said the wind is angry, okay? I'm really picking this apart. Given the weather, this power creates an ominous atmosphere filled with suspense that the characters are in danger. So again, because we're looking at pathetic fallacy, we're looking at how effective it is in creating an atmosphere. So if you have not used atmosphere in your answer, you're not fully answering the question, okay? Looking at all of these sections put together, this is what we should have in front of us. So the writer uses pathetic fallacy to describe the setting. That's my statement. So furious had been the gusts that high buildings in town had had the lead stripped off their roofs. This technique is effective as it suggests that the wind is ferocious and dangerous. Stating that high buildings in town had had the lead stripped off their roofs depicts the idea that the wind is powerful, violent, and dominant over everything else. Given the weather, this power creates an ominous atmosphere filled with suspense that the characters are in danger. Breaking that down, you guys are way more capable at putting together perhaps an even better paragraph than that. And that's something that I now want you to have a go at. So I want you to pick another quotation. I'd now like you to have a go at writing your own SQI paragraph. You've got an example on the previous slide, so either flick back to that if you're stuck, if you haven't copied it down or anything. Remember, our question is, how is the use of pathetic fallacy effective in this extract? But our focus is also on how pathetic fallacy is creating that atmosphere, okay? If you're still stuck on putting together your own paragraph, you can borrow this sentence starter for your statement. So we've got the writer uses pathetic fallacy as a technique to create a threatening atmosphere. You can change, let me just highlight it. You can change the adjective threatening, don't know why I highlighted, that's a really dodgy highlight, to literally any adjective that you want. It could be a sinister atmosphere, it could be a terrifying atmosphere, as long as you have a quotation to support your point. And then a sentence starter for your quotation to fit it in. A quote to show this is, remember your quotation marks when you are copying your quote down. And then the most important part again is your inference. So this is effective because it makes the weather seem. And then really try and break your quote down and tell us what is being suggested by the weather, okay? Again, as a challenge, try and zoom in on one keyword from your quotation. So the use of the word, say furious, suggests this is effective because. As a hard challenge, try and give more than one interpretation. So this suggests this. It could further imply, okay? So give more than one idea for either your zoom or for the entire quote. I would spend about 10 minutes on this paragraph. So pause the video and have a really good go. Okay, quick plenary. Can I use pathetic fallacy? So you are going to try and write your own short description of a setting using pathetic fallacy. So remember, pathetic fallacy is the focus of weather. And this is your scenario. So a mother is reunited with her child after losing them in a natural disaster. So two things are happening here. We've got something obviously very negative, that natural disaster, but also something quite positive. So maybe as a challenge, you might try and bring those two moods together, okay? Remember to upload your work to show my homework before 3 o'clock. And I'm looking forward to marking these. see you next week.